Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another incredible discussion. My name is Allison. I am your young adult pastor here at Westlawn UMC. And as many of you might have seen, about a month ago, I sat down with Pastor Chris and Mr. John Coakley, who's our minister of music here at Westlawn, to have a very important discussion on race. Now, with all the current events gaining traction in the media, over the past couple of months, race and racism are topics that people are finally not shying away from discussing, especially in places like the church. But honestly, the way I see it, what better place than the church to discuss these things? We decided that these conversations, like many other topics that seem to be untouched in the church, these are conversations that need to continue to be had in order to not only model how to have these conversations, but to pursue and fight for racial reconciliation for all people. Now, today I want to open up the conversation by talking about one of, we'll call it buzzwords, that I think most people have been noticing is a very hot topic in the media, and this term is systemic racism. Now, before anybody gets a little too defensive with that word, and that's not going to mock anyone because we all have, varying opinions based on our varying experience and background. But I want to talk about this term, what it means, where it comes from, and I want to start by asking you, John, do you believe that there is a racist systemic construct in place that influences or informs police and their decision making?
Yeah, I do. You said a mouthful when you talked about people and their experiences and how that changes their perception. And in my opinion, it is difficult to comment on the experience of someone else. But as far as the systemic racism question goes, there are parts of the system that have inherently racist tendencies that maybe not everybody can see, because based on that experience, you may not have been exposed to that part. As it is specifically relates to police, I think it's the police are part of the system, therefore they have racist components. I don't think that they are the only racist component of the racist system. And I don't think that it's intentionally a racist group either. I just think that now in today's world with cameras and with video and with body cams and whatever, we are seeing that racism brought to the fore.
And also, can you clarify what the system is? Because I feel like a lot of people, myself included in the beginning, of just gaining more information and knowledge about all of these things, the system just kind of sounds like this big potential conspiracy theory.
Right.
Like, what is the system?
Right.
So what is the system?
Such a good question. The system refers to really everything. The closer we go back to slavery, slavery is the system, right? And as we move forward from slavery, it becomes less visible. But, during the period of Reconstruction after slavery, there was a system created to be sure that, right after slavery, we had black senators and representatives. Black people were voting. There was a whole lot of forward movement of black people in this country, which made a lot of people that literally had lived through slavery uncomfortable. So then there was a movement towards restricting black people, first through law, through voting rights, through I don't know if you've heard of voting like rules, voting tests that black people had to pass, and obviously they could not because they were not educated, so they couldn't do that. There were things that were called redlining or districting, where they made it very difficult for black people to live in areas outside of very small areas. which resulted in those rules became the Jim Crow rules, the segregation rules. But if you fast forward to today, systemic racism looks very different.
Yeah.
It's not obviously encapsulated in law in most cases. It is not something that we're hit over the head with, that this is the way that it goes. But it is something that we deal with, for instance, in if we look at rates of mortgages. Black people will apply for a mortgage. An equivalent white person might apply for the same mortgage for the same amount, and all other things being equal, that black person is less likely to get the mortgage, be approved for the mortgage. Those are the kinds of things that we're talking about when we talk about systemic racism today.
Yeah.
There are still huge disparities in education, education levels. Even in my own family, my generation, my sister and I were the first. Well, that's not true. My parents' generation were the first generation to graduate from college. Yeah. But, before that, there was nobody, So, I mean, and some of those things encapsulate what modern systemic racism looks like. K through 12 education, the same thing. You look at the difference between Reading School District and its surrounding school districts. Why is that? Why is it that 80-some% of the students are in those city school districts are not doing well? They're failing. They're not. The school district itself is failing. Whereas some of the best school districts in the state are right next to it. There's things to be discussed.
Yeah, absolutely. I think about talking where all of it stems from, where it comes from, is really when people start to understand what systemic racism is. Because if you don't know historically the things that have happened, you can't understand why people feel the way that they do. So that's another one of the reasons why it's so important to stay informed and to gain more knowledge.
And since we're not teaching that in school. I didn't learn that in my school district. Then, how are we supposed to know that?
Allison, the question again, could you repeat that for us?
Yeah, I was just asking, I have to backtrack a little bit here. Hold on.
Systemic
We were just talking
or...
about, I almost asked a question specifically about the police, but we were focusing on what is the system and what does that mean? Because I feel like a lot of people just hear the word system, and a lot of the defensiveness can come from, I'm not a part of a system. What system are you talking about? Because I'm not a part of that. I wouldn't do that. And
yeah, I think a lot of our conversation seems to be in modern times, current times, to stem from police interactions.
Right.
And the question, the way it was worded, just sparked my interest about systemic racism construct within the police department. You said yes. And just to be clear, I think when we think of racism, we think of the stereotypical hillbilly,
KKK.
redneck, KKK, and the individual acts of people. So when we say yes, I just don't want to put in people's minds immediately that those are the police officers.
Right.
As a former police officer, at least in my small department, we didn't gather for roll call and say, let's go out and arrest some black folk. But I think the other racist part of it is exactly the constructs and what we're talking about. Now, yes, are there individual acts that are considered racist? Sure, absolutely.
Right. But even in the construct, there is still, and this is not specifically the police, there is a perception that, and a creation really, that black people are more dangerous, black people are less controllable, black people are more
prone to committing crimes.
Right, more apt to commit crimes. Therefore, not because each individual officer is racist, but because of that perception that we have systemically, we tend to arrest black people more, we incarcerate black people more, we stop black people more. So yes, you're exactly right. We're not saying that the individual police officers are are or are not racist. They may be, they may not be. But the system that they work inside can be racist.
Right. I mean, I was even thinking back to my days when I arrested whites and blacks. I consider myself a good cop, and I didn't plant drugs or weapons on anyone. I arrested both whites and blacks. And I would even say that now, the most of the arrests that occur, I would hope, that they were done within the law.
Right.
And even yet, just because then blacks are being arrested, and yes, they are committing crimes, I still would articulate now, where I am today, that is a product of the system previously that
Right.
you mentioned about
Oh, yeah.
education and housing, the old sociological phrase, violence begets violence.
Right.
Well, it's the same thing. All this continues to create and to fester, and yes, the police are sent to do their job, and they encounter, black people and crime. But I just want to point out that it goes deeper and beyond backing the blue, like we say a lot. I love the police officers. They're great for our community, and we can even talk about defunding and demilitarizing the police and what that conversation means. But this isn't, a knocking of police departments or
Right.
the men and women that
Right.
do their job responsibly and
Right.
ethically and morally.
Right.
But they are acting too within the construct that they are hired within.
That's exactly right.
So, as a former police officer, what do you believe is the primary function of the police? Or there could be a difference between what it is and what it should be.
I mean, I can go with the cliche, it's painted on a lot of cars, protect and to serve. I really do believe that is to protect and to serve.
Absolutely. That's what we want.
That's what you
That's
want.
what all people
You
want.
want
I think
to-
the question is, serve in what way?
Yeah.
There's
Right.
there's definitely a contingent out there that says that what happened to George Floyd. It came out today that George Floyd's counterfeit $20 bill was not in fact counterfeit.
Wow.
So actually, of course the police didn't know that, but the question is serving, does it always look like going in and catching the criminal, or does it look like, attending community functions? Does it look like, being on the beat, I think they used to call it, where, you're walking the streets and you're talking to kids and you're, building trust in the police. Because that's a lot of the issue too with black teens, especially, is because they've seen these things, they've heard these things, they don't trust police officers. So a lot of people will say, well, if they wouldn't run, then they wouldn't get dead. That's not necessarily the case in the mind of a black person,
Right.
because they are encountering a thing that they don't completely understand
Right.
in the police officer as well.
So, to piggyback off of that, when talking about George Floyd, because you mentioned what happened with George Floyd, what believes you, or anyone for that matter, to believe that Derek Chauvin's actions can or should not be classified as racist?
I said in our first talk, I didn't see it as racist. And playing it back, I noticed that John might disagree with that. So I hope to get your opinion on it. But even reflecting upon it, and I think this is where you and I conversation led us off camera, would the officer's actions been different had that person been white? Maybe. I don't know. I can't speak for...
And I think that right there is why I felt
The question itself,
There-
you're saying?
the fact that I couldn't believe that if George Floyd was a white man, that he would have been on the ground and that he would have had a knee in his neck. I cannot believe that. And because I don't believe that, I think that makes it a racist action. Breonna Taylor is a young woman who was, if you don't know the story, happened very soon or before or after George Floyd, I can't remember. But she was, they went into the police forcibly entered her apartment. She was asleep in her bed and she was shot and killed in her bed. Comes out later that the person they were looking for was actually caught prior to this. She's dead for no reason. That, on the other hand, I do not see as a racist action because they went into her apartment mistakenly. And I think that any person that was laying there in the bed could have potentially have been shot.
But do you see it racist that they tried charging the boyfriend,
Yes.
and now that no police have been held accountable?
Right.
So I see that part as racist.
Right.
But
I mean, here we are several months later, and
Right.
no police have been held accountable for her murder. So I mean, there are racist elements to it. However, I don't think that those cops that went into Breonna Taylor's home,
when it's a death squad,
right, they were not going in to kill a black person.
right? I would concur.
Do you think that the media is purposefully trying to put black people and white people against each other in this time, in 2020? I feel like one of the things that I see so much, just scrolling through my Instagram, is not only all of these things coming up in the news, which are truthful things. These are things that are happening. These are things that have happened. But I have been seeing so many just very heated arguments, heated comments, people being really nasty to each other, which does not surprise me. But do you think that the media is trying to specifically push people against each other and make some of these conflicts, I don't want to say even worse than they already are, because they are awful, but do you think the media has a handle on a lot of what's going on in our world?
I think the easy answer is yes. I mean, we have so many different news outlets, news styles, whether it's talk radio, the internet, cable news. They're all vying for our attention, which ultimately boils down to dollars and cents.
It does.
And the most views they get, the more clicks they get, the more ads, the more revenues they generate, the more controversial, the more divisive it is, the more attention it's going to get. So my answer is yes.
This should not surprise us. I haven't done my staff devotional yet. At least you haven't seen it, but I've already recorded it. And one of the things that I mentioned in there is in 2 Timothy, we're told that exactly what to expect from this world.
Absolutely.
And why should we be surprised? I mean, I think that there is definitely a contingent of the media out there that capitalizes on this, and they know they can make money off of it. So they are making it worse than it is. I especially want to point out that there have been a lot of peaceful protests in this country. There have been some violent protests in this country. There has been some looting. There have been a lot of negative things as well. But the way that it's portrayed and what's actually happening may or may not be the same thing. And I think that we all have to be careful of what type of news we are we choose to consume. Because there are news outlets out there that are like, you know what, this would make us a lot more money and we can sell a lot more, whatever it is that we're selling, if we make this a negative thing, because that's what people respond to.
And I lived it. 12 years ago, whatever it's been now, when I was accused of police brutality, and this was right when smartphones were coming out, and I wish they would have been there, but I don't know how it would have panned out. But for over a couple weeks, I was front page news. That was the opening top. Not I, but the other 5 officers and myself. We were the main topic on our local talk radio, front page news about police brutality, and it was all unsubstantiated. Just what
Doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter. It didn't matter, right? And that's what we lived in. But it sold newspapers then. And it got a lot of call-ins. They lit up the tree when they called into talk radio. So it just got a lot of attention. So
One of the race is a buzzword right now.
Absolutely.
If it has race in it, then it's a news story. So I think that there's been a lot of. I think that your question was exactly right on. Yes, there's a lot of making a big deal out of things that maybe shouldn't be.
And to be fair, I don't think it's a left or a right, and I don't think it's a
Yeah.
what do you want to call it, conservative or progressive. Whether it's Fox News or MSNBC, I think they both have a slant, and that's exactly what it is, a slant and a spin. And they want to pit. I just think it's obvious to me, and disgusting. And I will say, if you're looking for the gospel, the truth, by watching Fox News or MSNBC, you're not going to
You
find
are
it.
very, very, very cold.
Yeah. Yeah.
And cold, not as in cold-hearted, but just so far from
Far from where you need to
the
be.
truth. Yeah.
But I do believe in being informed, but I think that comes
Yes.
from multiple outlets and,
Absolutely.
and doing this and
Yes.
talking to real people
Yes.
and what's actually going on in the world versus what is framed on your
Yeah.
television set.
And one of the questions I want to ask you too, Chris, because I don't think we specifically asked you this in our previous discussion, but how did it make you feel to be portrayed as a racist and, you know, have that be a very difficult part of your life, I would assume.
Yeah, I mean, at that point in time in my life, and I will say I'm not a perfect person, so I always watch this. Oh, I know what you said when you're 10 or 15 or 16. Listen, I'm guilty as much as anybody. But that incident, knowing through and through my heart, I was doing my job, I was responding to a call to service that was credible, and what we went through, I mean, it drove me to depression and having suicidal thoughts, which ultimately brought me to God. So, hashtag thank you God.
Yeah.
For 6 months was the length of that investigation. And for the good first month, it was news. And then it got swept under the rug, pushed to the back page a little bit. But then that isolation and just the continued murmurs of it tears you apart.
It's terrible.
So yeah, being called a racist and unsubstantiated, I'm gonna stop saying words that are tongue twisters for me, is tough. And I think a lot of it becomes fueled by the media. It's easy to say, oh, there's a police officer involved in an incident with a person of color. This man was Hispanic. So, well, 5, 6 white cops, Hispanic. This is easy. You know, this is a lob for a home run. So,
I don't think that we can minimize, though, that there is statistical evidence
Absolutely.
that black people or people of color die at the hands of police at a higher rate than white people do. And that, you know, there are folks that don't want to say that there is an issue here.
3 times higher.
Right. There are folks that want to say there is no problem here. This is a post-racial society. I hate that word, post-racial society, because
As
you know
long as
what?
there are several different colors of skin, it will
There's going to
always
be
a
race. There's going to be
racial
race.
society,
There's
and
going to
that's
be
the way
race.
it was intended. So,
That's exactly right. You know, so
Yeah.
to say that post-racial society really enumerates that the person who is speaking has more privilege than they realize, because they don't have to look at race, right? They don't have to see the racial disparities, but that doesn't mean that those that are of color have that option. You know, that's the fact that people of color are dying at 3 times the rate, and we have a responsibility as Christians to recognize that.
I was going to bring that up next.
I'm really good.
That was great because the 3 of us are Christians. We go to the same church. We minister together. We worship together. What is our responsibility as Christians in all of this? Not just Allison, a white woman, not just John, a black man, not just Chris, a white man, but as Christians, as children of God that have accepted that adoption and have accepted Jesus as our Savior. What role do we play?
We can't just ignore it and it'll go away. Isn't that how this works? We stop talking about something and it goes away?
Yeah, no, it
Forget about
never
it.
really works out. Never works out that way.
Do you have a more serious answer?
It's a very tough thing to answer. I think that when the situation presents itself, when you are meant to do something, God will direct your step. And I truthfully believe that. I do think that, especially as the 3 of us, we attend a United Methodist Church, I think the United Methodist denomination, more than many others, embraces the idea of social justice. And I think that John Wesley embraced the idea of social justice. And I think that if we are really following our calling to be ministers to the world, then we need to embrace social justice.
Absolutely.
And I really truthfully believe that that starts when not, when you hear the racist joke or when you have the overtly racist situation happen. I think that goes when you call out the non-overt racism, the systemic racism, the privilege, or whatever you want to call it, that happens in everyday life. See it and respond to it.
Absolutely. And I love that you brought up social justice as well. I feel like one of the most pressing things that I see is that I feel like there are a lot of people, specifically people that are not people of color, that think of the term social justice and they immediately think, well, what do I have to benefit from social justice? Social justice is not for me. Social justice is for Black people. Social justice is not for me. It is for people who feel like they do not have equal rights for whatever reason. When in reality, and right now we will talk about social justice specifically when it comes to racism. If I fight for social justice and we fight together and we make an impact, then we are both experiencing a victory. It's not just for, it's all about the Black community and I just don't matter. That's the wrong way to look at it, because if we are fighting the same fight and we have been called to fight the same fight, to love one another well, to love one another equally, and to practice empathy, because that's what Christ did, we're all fighting for the same victory. Right. And I think that, being a white woman, that's just one of those things that I've noticed, that when it comes to the term social justice, people think, how do I play a part in social justice if it's not about me? And it's like, it is about you, because you have a part to play. Right. And you might not be the one that's hurting, but think about that. If you're not the one that's hurting, that means somebody else is hurting.
I think a wise teacher, who also happened to be God, said that we should treat each other how we want to be treated.
Exactly.
So if I see you suffering as a Black man, as a Black family, it's my role, it's my obligation as a Christian to make the world a better place. And let me just say, I'm a little on the politics side here, because I know that's what someone's going to say. Race is not a political issue. Those people choose to make it a political issue. And I say those people as in Democrats or Republicans. Race is also a God issue. And yes, there is a venue for religion in politics, because religion should inform, our faith shall inform our every part of who we are. And we live in the United States of America, so we have a right to inform others and also to advocate for change, and we get that done through the political system. That's just the way it is.
Absolutely.
To remain mum on it and say, oh no, we'll let the Republicans figure it out, or let the Democrats figure it out, or a little bit. We've shown now for a couple hundred years that we haven't figured it out yet.
Doesn't work.
Yeah.
It doesn't work. So as Christians, I think we have the obligation as individuals to educate ourselves and to help educate others, and in turn, that's what makes the world a better place.
Yeah. I feel like one of the most important things to keep in mind as we wrap up this conversation today is the concept of empathy. And I think empathy, other than knowledge and just gaining more insight about what is actually going on in the world, where we have come from, where we have yet to go, I feel like empathy is just that overarching thing that is missing from so many of these conversations, from our media posts to the conversations that we are having or should be having at the dinner table with the people that are closest to us, maybe even with the people that aren't, because sometimes that's the best place to start. But I just want to point out to everyone that is listening to this today that we're not always called to agree. We're not called to agree about all things. There are certain things that are, they're written in the Word, and we are called above all else to pursue holiness and righteousness and to follow the truth of the Word of God and allow that to shape and guide our lives and the way we fight for others, the way that we empathize with others, the way that we choose to inform other people. But I think choosing to empathize with our brothers and sisters that are hurting is honestly one of the best things that we can do to pursue any kind of reconciliation, whether that be racial or otherwise, because there are a lot of issues in this world. And especially coming from, a Christian perspective, I know that's something that the three of us are certainly not blind to seeing a lot of the issues that are in our world. But I want to share a quote by one of my favorite, my inspirations. I know that you know Dietrich Bonhoeffer. Are you familiar with Bonhoeffer at all?
Not sure.
Not a lot of people are. It's kind of like a Christian. I'm a big nerd, and and I really like to read sometimes. But he was an incredible Christian teacher, evangelist, writer. And he has this one quote, and it says, "We must learn to regard people less in the light of what they do or omit to do, and more in the light of what they suffer." And I also want to point out how that coincides perfectly with Colossians 3, and it reads, "Therefore, as God's chosen people, holy and dearly loved, clothe yourselves with compassion."
Amen.
And that's a command, in case you guys didn't pick up on that.
Amen.
Clothe yourselves with compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience, fruits of the Spirit. Bear with each other and forgive one another if any of you has a grievance against someone. Forgive as the Lord forgave you, and over all these virtues put on love, which binds them together in perfect unity. Let the peace of Christ rule in your hearts, since as members of one body you are called to peace. So for those of you that are listening that maybe did not glean anything else from this conversation, I encourage everyone to go back and read that passage, because I feel like so much of what was said wraps up and supports exactly where the three of us are coming from. Even though we have very different experiences, which is great. But for those of you that have tuned in, thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this entire conversation. Please like it, comment on it kindly. Feel free to email us here at West Lawn if you have feedback. We are always here to accept feedback and constructive criticism. We will be putting out more of these discussions because, as I said before, they are very important, they are very pressing, and we want to be the people, the church, we want to be the people to facilitate these conversations and model how to have them, because these are things we need to talk about. Stay tuned for our next discussion, because we have a lot of very interesting comments to address. So maybe you have certain comments or things that you've heard in the media, questions that have been on your heart. We're going to be addressing next time some of the comments that people really don't want to talk about. Some things that kind of push people's buttons. We're going to be addressing those questions, and I'm really looking forward to it.
Yeah, it should be fun.
But we love all of you. We are praying for all of you, and we look forward to talking with you next time.